This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 69. Welcome to the 69th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. So one of the most common questions that I get from listeners and readers of my blog is, how long will it take for my period to come back after I come off the pill or after I stop taking other hormonal contraceptives? So I decided to create an awesome resource that tackles this tough question, and it's free when you sign up for the Fertility Friday newsletter. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/ebook to get your free copy of my new ebook, Where the Is My Period? 5 ways to restore your menstrual cycle health and fertility after coming off of the pill, where I reveal what to expect when coming off of hormonal contraceptives, and I also share 5 steps to restoring healthy menstrual cycles post-pill. I did take a little bit of a risk with the title. I don't spell the word out. I have it bleeped out in the title on the page of the book, but I wanted to express the sheer frustration that I feel from my listeners, from my readers, and from women all over the place who are coming off the pill only to find that their menstrual cycles are a total mess. So I hope you enjoy the book. I'd love to hear your feedback. So make sure to comment and let me know if you're enjoying it. And if you've been enjoying the show, I would love it if you take a moment to leave a review and a rating on iTunes. It does help the show to move up in rankings so that more people can find it. And of course, I'd like to say a special thank you to all the listeners who've left reviews already. I do read all of your reviews, and I really appreciate you taking the time to let me know how I'm doing. And in today's show, I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Hannah Crum. Hannah has been affectionately dubbed the Kombucha Mama, and since 2004, she has been brewing kombucha and educating others about how easy it is to make this delicious and healthy longevity elixir, as it's been called. Hannah has taught workshops all over the U.S. for over a decade, spreading the message of kombucha and the bacterial benefits, and her how-to videos have actually piled up hundreds of thousands of views. So if you haven't had a chance to check those out, make sure to check the show notes page for the link to all of the how-to videos. And also, Hannah's new book, The Big Book of Kombucha, has just come out. So 10 days ago, it came out on March 8th. So we're going to talk a lot more about that. And in today's show, we're going to be talking obviously all about kombucha, the health benefits of this amazing fermented probiotic beverage, and the different ways that it can be beneficial for women after coming off the hormonal birth control pill, for women trying to get pregnant or even during pregnancy. And so without further ado, welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. So my first question to you, and this is probably the first question that you get whenever you do interviews, but how did you end up becoming like the kombucha guru? So what drew you into this world?
Here's something that you will find is always true. People who make kombucha or drink kombucha, they will always remember the first time they experienced it. And I call that kombucha kismet. Kismet means fate. And for me, it happened in San Francisco. I was visiting a friend from college who had moved from the Midwest, where I'm from, out to the West Coast. And as we're checking out their really groovy apartment in San Francisco, one of the things they had was a box of jars that were all covered with towels. And they had this weird floaty stuff in there. And they go, that's the kombucha. I'd never heard of it. I'd never tried it. And in fact, we didn't even taste theirs because it was still brewing. But when I got back to LA, where I live, of course, it was in all the Whole Foods. So I went to the Whole Foods, I grabbed a bottle off the shelf, and it was, my first taste was that, the heavens parted, the lights shone down, the angels were singing, and I just felt electrified. The flavor was sour and sweet and punchy. It was gingery, and my body really just resonated with that flavor and that vibration. And I have to confess, Lisa, I don't know if you're like me, but when I was a kid, I would sneak the pickle juice out of the pickle jar. Now, these weren't naturally fermented pickles. It probably had a ton of chemicals or whatever in it. But I love that sour, salty, yummy flavor. And there was something about the kombucha that really hit all of those notes as well. And I was instantly hooked. And then it's one of those things. It was still $5 a bottle or more. And when your thirst outgrows your budget, you start to get crafty. And since I knew other people were making it, I was like, I can make this. I have no idea how to do it, but I'm going to learn how to do it. So I went to the library. I checked out every book I could find. And thankfully LA is a very large community, and I was able to find a culture here locally. And I've just been brewing it ever since, and that was back in 2003. In 2004, I was inspired by an Artist Way class to teach kombucha, and that's when Kombucha Camp was formed. So it was originally a class in my home to teach people how to brew. My husband thought I was crazy. He thought this stuff was so weird and like, why do you need to teach people how to make tea? And I'm like, it's not really about that, Lisa. As you know, we've kind of lost the thread of fermentation that all of our ancestors have passed down. And so, really, more than anything else, it's helping people to feel comfortable and safe working with a food that they're unfamiliar with. But, that workshop then inspired a website in 2007 where I was just blogging about kombucha. And people started asking, hey, do you have a culture? Can I get a culture here? And so, organically, just through people resonating with the information I was putting out there, they started to request products. And so that's kind of our motto at Kombucha Camp. It's quality information, quality supplies, and then quality support. So, this is about empowerment. It's about people feeling confident in their kitchens, making something that's good for them.
Well, and as I sit here chatting with you, sipping on some kombucha that I made, episode number 66, so this is episode 69. So 4 episodes ago, I actually interviewed Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, and we talked about the GAPS diet and the importance of probiotic-rich foods and drinks in terms of like healing the gut and like the health benefits. So for the listeners who are like, what the heck is kombucha? What is she talking about? Maybe you could tell us about kombucha and why, other than the fact that it's, super yummy, why it's actually good for us.
Absolutely. And, kombucha is one of those things that I think is not on the gaps until a little bit later in the process. But it's basically fermented tea. So, or cultured tea. So just like we think of yogurt as being cultured milk, right, where we add a starter to it, we give it some time to ferment and it turns into yogurt. That's what kombucha is. It's the same thing, but it's tea. So we just take tea, which is so incredibly healthy for us, right? All the antioxidants, the polyphenols. There's been so much research done on tea in terms of preventing cancer, with weight loss, with diabetes. So we take something that's already incredibly nutritious for us. We then ferment it with a culture that is unlike other ferments. Like we have a lot of lacto ferments, like the milk ferments or the sauerkrauts and things like that. This is an acetic acid ferment, similar to vinegar, which is where that tangy flavor comes in. And if we just think about vinegar and all of the health benefits we associate with raw apple cider vinegar, with helping with cholesterol, again, helping with diabetes and all kinds of other things, imagine now we've combined these two things together into this superpower. Instead of it being times 2, it's exponential in terms of how that nutrition is then able to be extrapolated through the fermentation process and made more bioavailable. So when you consume it, you're getting the maximum benefit from those elements. And there have been many studies showing that the vitamin content, vitamin C and the B vitamins, they go up when you ferment using the kombucha culture. So not only is there an increase in nutritional value through the vitamins, but the healthy acids created by the fermentation process are specifically beneficial to the human organism in that they help to remove toxins from the body. So one of those healthy acids is, of course, glucuronic acid, as well as gluconic acid. And our bodies make glucuronic acid, but knowing how many toxins we're exposed to, be that in the water, in the food, in the air, in the products we put on our bodies, like our bodies are basically in toxic overload, and we don't produce enough glucuronic acid on our own to support healthy functioning. And so consuming something that essentially comes in and cleans out the filter, cleans your liver, and helps support the body, really what we're doing is bringing the body back into balance so the body can heal itself. We never like to say that kombucha is the thing doing it. Kombucha just helps support the body so that it can do what it's naturally capable of doing, which is regeneration and immunity.
Well, one of the questions I get so frequently, a lot of my listeners are either on the birth control pill, thinking about coming off of it, or have recently come off of it. And so one of the questions I get a lot is, just came off the pill. What are some of the things I can do to detoxify my body? So I've had, a number of different podcasts where we talk about different types of detoxification. So from just removing the bad stuff, like, the chemical lotions and all that kind of stuff from your body,
Hmm.
so xenoestrogens, to, eating differently, to juicing. So what role could something like kombucha play, like you said, in helping your body to kind of more efficiently detoxify?
Exactly. So the glucuronic acid is a huge part of that. And then kombucha is also considered an adaptogen. So adaptogen is a term that's applied to things like ginger and astragalus and all different kinds of herbs that serve a specific function. They have three criteria they meet. One is that they are non-toxic, the other is that they're non-specific, and the third is that they help balance the body. So this all sounds somewhat generic in what it does, but what it means is that it works differently in each person's body based on the needs that they have. So how it can help specifically with, coming off the pill and things like that is that, again, it's going to clean the filter. So the liver is the organ where all of our xenobiotics, these are things that come from outside the body, be they pharmaceutical medications or alcohol or even the birth control pill or things like that, come through the liver. The liver then prevents those things from getting into the bloodstream and, potentially making the body feel worse. However, again, as so many of these collect in the liver, if they don't have something that helps to remove them, as you can imagine, the functioning starts to slow down and you don't feel as good. So back to that glucuronic acid, what it does is that molecule binds to these toxins. And once the bond is created, it can't be broken. Then through hydrolysis, or basically drinking water, we then flush those toxins out of our body. So it's a very gradual process, but it is something where people do report having an immediate feeling of well-being, be that their improved digestion, be that they have more energy because of the yeast has all the B vitamins in living form. And again, this is like in trace amounts. So it's not like it has massive quantities of these things, but they're in a form that our body has evolved to recognize. And it's like a puzzle piece. When your body finds a nutritional component that it's evolved to work with, it locks in because it has a specific molecular shape. And, so the difference between like a supplement form of a nutrient versus a living form is that it has a different shape. And so your body's able to utilize it instantly in a way that, maybe it can't fully derive the benefit from the other form because that shape is not as familiar.
Okay, when it comes to the probiotic aspect of kombucha, part of the reason why I've been delving into gut health is because I feel like one of the areas that is last to even come to mind when it comes to fertility and like what should I do before I get pregnant. I feel like the gut health it's just not the first thing people think about. They don't think about cleaning up their gut. And so the birth control pill can actually, disrupt the gut flora. And so when it comes to actually like fermented foods, including kombucha, the other probiotic foods you talked about as well, like not just kombucha, but fermented milk products like yogurt or kefir, or fermented vegetables like sauerkraut, how is that different from just taking a probiotic, you know?
Well, first of all, we evolved consuming our probiotics through food. And so we're used to getting doses that are associated with food. I mean, think about it like this: sauerkraut, condiments, ketchup, mustard, salsas, chutneys, all of these were our fermented foods. Think about in what quantity you're typically consuming those foods, right? They're in small amounts, they add extra flavor and zip, they help with digestion. I mean, think about, you got sauerkraut on your Reuben because you got to have something to help you break down all that meat. So again, our bodies are used to receiving these bacterial doses, in small, frequent amounts through your food supply. When we take a probiotic supplement, and they can be beneficial for some people, but what happens is you're basically dropping a nuclear, just like antibiotics drops a nuclear bomb in there to destroy everything. Now you're dropping a massive amounts of organisms, and that may or may not be good for your system. That can be an intense, overwhelming situation. And some people find, they immediately end up in the bathroom as a result of that. And now what we're also seeing is some people are over colonizing with specific types of probiotics because they're only taking one type. So again, it's not about one food or one kombucha doing everything. It's a diversity of these in your diet. So it's the sauerkraut with your meal, it's the kombucha in between, it's the milk kefir in the morning in your smoothie. It's all of these things working in concert in those small doses that we evolved to recognize that really best supports the body and the health.
I think that really it kind of gives like a visual, like a really good idea of it, because you think of a probiotic and it has maybe like 10 strains, 12 strains, if you're lucky. And there's strains that somebody decided on.
Right, right.
And I'm sure we're going to talk more about the SCOBY. So that's
Yeah,
the symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast that actually grows on top of your tea and ferments it. Is that right?
that is right. Hmm.
Okay. And so when you look at that thing, it is complex.
Yes.
There's a lot going on there. And so obviously there's a serious, like, there's just a community of these microbes, like you said, bacteria and yeasts, and they have like their whole little thing going on. And so if you take a probiotic, it's still beneficial, I think, in a lot of cases, and it can still have good effects. But I just, I think we're a long way from understanding the complexity of the naturally occurring probiotics in fermented foods.
Well, and probiotic is kind of a loosely defined term, and it's not something that's fully understood yet. And I think we're, with the research happening with the Human Microbiome Project and just really understanding, for years people knew there were bacteria in the body, but they just said, oh, they don't do anything. And now we're starting to realize, in fact, they are the thing. And when you talk about fertility, be that in the earth or in the human body, it's all about the soil. And does the soil have the nutritional inputs it needs for organisms to grow from it? And so, in fact, your gut is probably one of the first places you should go to try to heal when you're considering growing an organism from your body. Because if that soil doesn't have the nutritional inputs it needs, if it doesn't have that bacterial diversity, it's going to be really hard to grow something in there. And we're kind of the microcosm of the macrocosm, and if we use that metaphor to think about our bodies, we start to realize that it's quality, not quantity. It's those nutrient dense foods that have, again, those inputs in a living form that are really going to allow our bodies to do what they do naturally, and that's regenerate. It's beyond sustainable. It's regeneration. That's what happens is every cell in our body regenerates every 7 years, and certain cells faster than that. So when we remember that we have this amazing ability to completely change in such a short period of time, I think there's a lot of power in understanding, hey, if I start to make choices that benefit my overall body, that's what's going to result in getting further afield through in this process.
Well, and I think it's so interesting what you were talking about with respect to, the way people used to eat and having fermented condiments. So, yeah, like old school ketchup was actually fermented. It was actually healthy. It wasn't like the sugar filled, I don't know, what do you want to call it? But tastes good though.
Simulacrum.
But
Exactly. And that's what's happened with the processed foods industry is foods that were traditionally good for us, lard and, these fermented condiments have been substituted for, hydrogenated vegetable oils, which we're very quickly learning are incredibly bad for us. The whole thing about eggs and butter and cholesterol that now is being completely reversed. Look, it makes sense that the things our ancestors consumed in their, as close to natural forms, of course, are the things that are going to help support our bodies in a better way than something that, humans can think up in a lab. As much as we're clever and intelligent, as both of us can acknowledge, we don't truly understand all of the machinations of that which we experience. And I think that's something to remember in terms of science. Science is knowledge. Science is a technique. Scientific method is a technique developed to discover a phenomenon. But here's the thing: the phenomenon already exists. We already reproduce. We already breathe and make new cells. How do we do it? We may not know, but it already exists. And so what's interesting to me is, kombucha has purportedly helped with numerous types of health issues, but people out there want to say, oh, well, none of that is actual evidence because X, Y, or Z double blind study hasn't been conducted. And, when we think about how many products have been through a double blind study process and yet turn out to still be harmful to human health, you kind of got to wonder, okay, well, maybe we should be taking some of this observable phenomena into account as well, rather than solely relying on, well, what did one study or another say?
well, yeah, I think that leads me into, for the listeners who might not be familiar with kombucha. So we talked about what it is, but maybe you could just touch briefly on kind of the history, like how long people have been making this tea. It didn't just come out a year ago or something like that.
It's true, it's true. And just like all of the fermented foods, where did they come from? We don't have definitive written records that say on this day this thing was invented. So it's like everything that comes from the natural world, it evolved out of, bacteria and whatnot. So kombucha, it could be hundreds of years old, it could be thousands of years old. We don't necessarily know for sure, but what we do know is that at some point in time, someone observed, as you said, this SCOBY, this symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. The bacteria throw out nanofibers of cellulose that bond together, and that's what creates this pellicle, this structure. It's kind of like a mother ship. And then the yeast strands are these kind of brownish globs that hang off the bottom of it and are also woven in between. And we take this mothership from batch to batch of sweet tea, and people just, again, trusting their instincts, trusting the information that their bodies gave them, trusting their guts, which is our motto, trust your gut. Could tell that they were getting a benefit by consuming it, and that's what led them to perpetuate it. And here's the thing I want to help people understand. We have a lot of fear around preparing kombucha because it's unfamiliar. It's just a food like anything else. And again, if this thing were so difficult to do, if it were so dangerous and deadly, humans would have given it up forever ago. We never would have even heard of it. The fact that it's still here today is because it's like yogurt. How many people are eating yogurt and being like, oh no, am I eating too much? Or, oh, like there's just, again, it's, I think, a lack of understanding of what kombucha is and ascribing to it some other mystical quality that kind of hinders it from being understood and accepted as just another food, like all these other great foods that have been passed down and are here really to help our bodies, heal and function properly.
Well, and so I think I'll share, like, because what you're saying is really resonating with me because, so for the last, little while, I guess, maybe the last 2 years, I've been kind of experimenting with different fermented foods. So, I've made sauerkraut, I've made like beet kvass and like just different things. And recently I started making milk kefir when I started to finally have access to raw milk. Woohoo. And so then I also started making kombucha. So my husband's been very supportive. You could just see it, like you could just picture him, like, what is she doing now?
Totally.
But what I find to be kind of really interesting about this process is, well, other than the fact that I feel like a little scientist, is that you really kind of realize the difference between the food that we eat, like when you buy a bag of chips and you eat them, and then something like kombucha or kefir or sauerkraut, because it's alive. Like, I've started to call them my pets. Lovingly. But the reason that I say that is because with the kefir, like you kefir it, you put the grains in the milk and then you let it sit there for up to 24 hours or however you like it. And that's all you do. You just pour the milk in the bottle and you put the kefir grains in and then you just let it sit there. And then you can take the grains out so that it doesn't keep working, but you can leave it out. Like, you can actually leave it because it's alive, so it doesn't go bad. And that's the whole idea of fermentation, right? It preserves food, and that's why people used to use it. And so it just really makes you think differently about what food is because of all the beneficial microbes, the enzymes. And I think that's one of the reasons why, people would eat these foods with their meals, because then those enzymes help you to digest your food.
Exactly right. And what you're saying is so much of what we try to help people understand. I mean, we as a culture have gotten away from the concept that food is specifically to nutrify our body, to give them things that our bodies can't make on our own. Like, plants photosynthesize. Everything that they need, they get from the sun. And while we need sunshine too, we aren't able to create all of the nutritional components that we need just from the air and the sun. And so we eat food in order to nutrify those cells and to create enzymatic reactions, to be catalysts that create other things that happen within our body. And in fact, even the serotonin and the quote unquote happy drugs that our body produces comes from our food and our digestive system. I used to think there's a little pharmacy up there just dispensing drugs. Right, of course, when you think about it, oh, duh, it makes so much sense. It's coming from what I'm eating. And so, when you realize that what we've been fed, unfortunately, is this really toxic, poisonous food supply, um, it makes a lot of sense why kombucha is becoming popular right now. It's the real thing. It doesn't have to have, pretty people paid thousands, millions of dollars to prance on stage and sing about, how great this is and you should drink it too. Because when you drink it, when you taste it, you feel it. You have that experience. And that's something, that is very different. And that's what differentiates these foods from, again, those simulacrum, from those fake foods. Sodas imitate fermented drinks. Humans have always fermented drinks because we couldn't drink the water. The water had bacteria that would give us dysentery. The water wasn't safe. And in fact, they posit that grain started not to make bread, but to make beer, because by fermenting the water, it naturally got rid of the toxic elements. It would outcompete those toxic bacteria, and it would populate it with positive bacteria. And moreover, there's trace amounts of ethanol created in all fermentation processes, and that helps our organism in a really positive way. And so all of the nutritional components that are part of fermentation, we've always consumed. And there's also natural CO2. So when you think about a soda, they're putting fake CO2 in it to imitate the natural bubbles we get from fermentation. They put an acid in there that's actually bad for the body and removes nutrients, whereas the healthy organic acids from our fermented drinks support the body and put nutrition back into it. And then they put all these kind of flavorings and things in it, which is something that we can do naturally with all of our fermented drinks at home. So they're basically selling you something that we are instinctually craving. Because think about it, how did ancients know that fermentation was happening? They didn't understand microorganisms or, the level of science knowledge that we have these days. They had to look for other signs, and one of those signs was the bubbles that would form on the top. So we instinctually crave bubbles. But when we don't understand that we're not getting the bubbles we seek because we're not getting the nutritional payoff we seek, we have this open loop. We have a loop that's not closed. And then you add to it the fake sweeteners that, again, get you chemically addicted and aren't giving the brain the sugar rush it's seeking. And when you give it that sugar rush, you don't then crave it, right? Because you've satisfied that which your body is seeking. But when you're always consuming these artificial chemical versions of sugar, your brain never gets the payoff, and so you constantly consume things that don't ever nutrify you. I mean, I really see obesity and things like that as more malnutrition. It's the body is desperate for nutrients, but the propaganda and the brain and the lack of knowledge causes you to consume foods that don't provide that nutritional payoff. And so you're basically starving while you're over consuming foods that don't have a benefit on your body.
Well, and I can't echo that sentiment more. So, from my little science experiments in my kitchen, there's so many neat things about making kombucha or other. I've actually experimented with other sodas. So, like making a kefir soda or making like a ginger soda. So
Yeah.
I've been busy in my kitchen. But what's really interesting are a few things. Like one is that like even though you put sugar in it so that it can ferment, and I definitely want to go through how we make kombucha. But the bacteria, the microbes, they eat the sugar. So then you end up with something that isn't actually as sweet, but still because of the acidity, because of the complex flavors going on. And then you can add your own, if you want to add your own flavoring, like if you want to add a juice or something like that to it. But it's really interesting because even though it's not very sweet, it's very satisfying because the flavor is so complex and robust. Like it's a lot more complex than, say, a Canada Dry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and fermented drinks were the norm until Prohibition came along. People, ginger ale, right? Root beer. These were things that were low alcohol fermented drinks that everybody drank, and children had them too, and there was no problem with it. It's more our modern conception, and hangups about alcohol that prevent us from understanding that historic component of the role that it served. And I won't get off on one of my other crazy theories, but to stay focused on kombucha in these drinks is that our bodies need this stuff, and it's only this weird bubble in time that we aren't consuming these on a regular basis that look at how insane the illness rates have become. Look at how much pain and suffering people are dealing with as a result of their bodies not having access to the foods that really help support them. And, so these are, making these things at home are an easy way to save money and have something healthy. And in terms of the sugar, that's what I wanted to talk about, is we have a tendency in our culture to demonize things. It's all bad, it's all good. More often than not, everything is, gray than black and white. And sugar, again, it's considered the source. Is it a high fructose, incredibly processed sugar that has no nutritional value? Is it an aspartame that causes, chemical addiction? In fact, sugar is a nutrient for everything. Your DNA has a sugar phosphate backbone. Now, granted, that's not the same as table sugar, but point being, sugar is incredibly vital. And so to throw all the sugar out with this issue because our foods, are poisoned with chemicalized sugars is again missing the point. Like, sugar is incredibly important for all living organisms. But of course, the quantities in which you consume it and the way in which it's consumed makes all the difference. So consider the source. And that's the source of your food. That's the source of your information. But like you said, the sugar is, so how we make kombucha, just real quick, it's kombucha tea, easy as 1, 2, 3. I got a little song. You ready to hear it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Kombucha tea, easy as 1, 2, 3. Brew sweet tea, add a SCOBY, wait a week and then repeat.
Nice.
Right? Nice and easy. That's so easy. But that's all we're doing. We're brewing sweet tea. We're making tea and sugar. It's 1 cup of sugar per gallon. It's 3 to 5 tea bags or 3 to 5 teaspoons of loose leaf tea per gallon. You brew all that up. Once you have that brewed up, you then add your SCOBY. That's your symbiotic culture, bacteria and yeast. You have 1 cup of really strong starter at least per gallon. So 1 SCOBY and 1 cup of starter liquid per gallon. So if you're making a larger batch, you'll want to double that or scale it to the size of vessel you're using. And then we get it to the right temperature zone. So again, if we give organisms their appropriate inputs for them to thrive, they will thrive. So with kombucha, it's almost nursery-like in what they prefer. They like that 75 to 85, with 78 to 80 being the sweet spot. So once you kind of get it into that nice temperature range, it takes about 5 to 10 days, depending on your taste preference. So for some people, because they're over sugarified, because of the foods they consume, their palate has shifted. They might find kombucha initially a little intense to drink, so they can brew it on the sweeter side. And often what happens is the longer you consume it, the more tangy you prefer that flavor to be. And even sometimes if it gets a little too tangy, what I'll do is I'll just dilute it with water. This is like having a little lemon in your water, but you still get that full probiotic benefit. It also shifts the pH a little bit, just like an ice cube in scotch does. It opens up the flavor. It makes it allows you to experience the complexity, as you were talking about, a little more finely. And there's a lot of different ways we can enjoy the kombucha. And then flavoring it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it has, it's like vinegar, where it can extract nutritional value from whatever you're putting into it. It becomes a terrific delivery system for herbal nutrition. So if that's ginger, that helps with anti-inflammatory, it helps with digestion. If it's berries, they're high in anthocyanin and antioxidants. So whatever you're putting into your brew, you're passing on that nutritional benefit to you. And a little bit goes a long way. So you don't even need a lot of it, just a little bit of it to create that delicious flavor and, of course, those bubbles.
Well, I think it's what you touched on about soda and how, a lot of people are addicted to soda because we are kind of evolved to want that fizzy texture and flavor, and how they mimic the natural healthy version into this toxic, not so good version. I think it's really interesting because then the implications are, especially as women are preparing for pregnancy, everything's bad, do this with your diet. There's a couple of things I could say about that, but when you're trying to replace something, or it's usually just get rid of, right? So we just say, get rid of the sodas, This actually provides an alternative, and not just something like, not just an alternative that's like not bad, but it's not as bad. It's an alternative that's actually beneficial for, a lot of women. And also, one of the things I think is interesting is the focus when a woman is trying to get pregnant, preconception nutrition, is to always talk about like the healthiest foods she can be eating. And I think it's important to point out that it's a 2-part process. I mean, you can put in the most amazing foods into your body, but if your gut is totally messed up and you don't have the beneficial microbes, part of what the bacteria do are to help you break down the food and to help you absorb the nutrition. So if you don't have the healthy gut to actually be able to utilize the food, then you can keep pouring in all this great food, but it's not necessarily going to be absorbed.
Exactly right. And let's just talk a little bit about kombucha and pregnancy because we get this question all the time. There's some people out there who say, "Oh, you have to avoid it." There's a whole laundry list of foods you're supposed to avoid as a pregnant person, and for various reasons. And sometimes kombucha is on that list. But here's the thing. Trust your gut. Nobody knows your body like anyone else. Moreover, your body is made up of a unique combination of bacteria and yeast. And of course, that's going to be influenced by your entire life. And so it's listening to your body and how it responds that will help guide you to, is kombucha an appropriate, food for me to consume while I'm pregnant or getting pregnant and things like that. So for instance, I had a friend who really loved kombucha. She got pregnant. She couldn't stand the smell of it. That's your body saying, don't drink that right now. I've had other women tell me, oh my gosh, I craved kombucha. I drank it all through my pregnancy. I've had other women say, I drank kombucha while I was breastfeeding. It helped the breast milk to flow. So we get a lot of different responses. And again, it's coming back and closing that biofeedback loop. And how we do that is listening to the information our bodies give us. And that, again, is part of the disconnection that's occurred with the advertising, is that you'll be sitting there eating something that is making you feel terrible, not realizing that's what's making you feel terrible while you're complaining about how terrible you feel. That's how disconnected we are from our bodies and the things we're putting into it. But when we start to close that feedback loop, and kombucha is a great way to do that, what I recommend is a little bit first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. Is that 2 ounces, 4 ounces, 8 ounces? You decide. But what happens then is you feel how the kombucha is working in your body specifically. And to speak to your other point of, people are at all different states of bacterial health in their guts because, overprescription of antibiotics and, chemicals in the water and food can destroy these organisms as well. Sometimes kombucha is going to be too intense for some people and it's not going to sit well with their system. And maybe what's better for you then first is something like a milk kefir or water kefir. Those are lactoferments. Those are going to put different types of organisms in your body. And then as your body starts to heal, you can add something like kombucha back in. So if you're drinking kombucha and you're finding, oh, I feel terrible when I do this, maybe now's not the right time for you to drink it. Try some other ferments and see how, if you can help your body heal, and then give it a try later. So it's not a one size fits all solution for everybody. And also to speak to the prenatal nutrition, in ancient societies, when women were around that age of fertility, they were put on a diet of special foods for sometimes years, before getting pregnant. And so we think, okay, now I've made the decision, now I'll get healthy. But sometimes, if we're thinking ahead and preparing our bodies for that eventuality, we might get started on that nutrition even before we're ready to consider conceiving.
Oh, I love that you say that, because that's one of the, I would love to play a little role in bringing about more consciousness around the idea of pregnancy and the idea of not just ignoring your reproductive organs for 20 years. And then, because basically, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but that whole idea where we've been trained to think that the set it and forget it birth control solution is not harming or not harmful to our health. And there's a really big disconnect between the idea, because we never really have thought about that critically. So the idea of shutting down your reproductive organs for like a decade, and then assuming that as soon as you stop taking the hormones, that everything's just going to jump back in place. I think that there's a huge disconnect there, because if you actually stop to think about it, that doesn't even make sense.
Agreed. And moreover, look, I've been off birth control for over 10 years, and it's, if you don't want to be pregnant for some reason, you may not end up pregnant. You know what I mean? Like and I don't know what your thoughts are, but there's this idea of conscious conception where your body will fall. I don't want to make it sound all woo woo and magic, but there is something to when it's ready, when you have the right nutritional inputs, when it's the right time in your life. Like stress is a huge factor, and there can be a lot of stress around getting pregnant, and sometimes that can even prevent you from getting pregnant because you're just having so much anxiety around it. But in my journey, last year I had a miscarriage. It was completely unexpected, and I had never been pregnant my whole life. I'm 40 now, so it was exciting for as long as I knew about it. And then it was really tough, and I struggled with that, and I went through the like, oh, I'm gonna make it happen, and then realizing that's not how this works. Like, the reason it happened in the first place was there was an openness and a receptivity to it, as opposed to that more, that more yin energy to it, as opposed to the more yang, like I'm going to make it happen energy. And it's tough to find that balance. But, I'm also, open to, and I don't know how you feel about this stuff. Again, I'm trying not to be too woo woo here, but for me, it's like trusting the universe, and that when the timing is right. The truth is, if I had gotten pregnant then with this book tour that's going on and the constant travel, it would have been really intense to have an infant at that time. And, maybe on some level, my body understood that it's better for me to wait until a time when there's more space for that to happen. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to worry about getting too woo-woo here. I do a lot of different topics, and one of them is that idea of conscious conception. I'm very sorry to hear that you had a miscarriage. It's something that I've talked about on the show as well. I think a lot of women feel isolated when it happens, because it's only when a woman shares that she's had one that all of a sudden everyone comes out of the woodwork, and they're like, yeah, I had one too. Oh, my sister had one. Oh, my mom had two. And then all of a sudden you realize that you're not alone.
well, and that it's incredibly common. And, maybe some of it is related to not having the correct nutrition, and maybe, there's other factors at play. But, as I didn't expect it to be as tough as I thought it would be. I thought, okay, I'm one of those, universe provides kind of people. I totally get that. But there really was a lot of emotions that came up around it. And I'm grateful for being able to do that, and to be in a place where I can find more peace around it.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you for sharing that. I think that it helps, because there's always women listening who have either recently experienced or, you know, maybe
Hmm.
going through it right now, and maybe that was exactly what someone needed to hear. I did want to go back to that whole idea of kombucha in pregnancy, because you talked, and I really loved how you talked about listening to your body, because I think that it still gets back to that idea of conscious conception, like really being aware of what's happening with you, and really kind of understand. Like, I just love what you said about there being like a time for everything, and things
Mm.
happen when they're supposed to. But one of the questions I could see women asking, because at the top of the podcast, we talked about kombucha's detoxifying effects and how it can actually help your body to remove toxins. So for a woman who heard all of that, and she's like, you know what, I think kombucha would be great, a great addition, to my health protocol. I think I might want to try to get more probiotics into my diet, and this sounds like a great way to get rid of some sodas. But, I'm trying to get pregnant now, and I'm concerned that if I'm detoxifying, it might not be a good thing to do at the same time as trying to get pregnant. So how do you kind of negotiate those types of concerns?
Again, it's listening to your body and trusting the wisdom of the body, right? We're never given more than we can handle, or if we are, we're dead. But you know what I'm saying? So there's an innate wisdom that we, again, are not taught to think about or to connect into. But if you imagine, we've been through millions of years of evolution, and all of that still lives. All of that intelligence lives in our DNA. As an example, they've done some studies with infants where they'll just put out a variety of foods, and the infants will gravitate, oftentimes they'll only eat one type of food. But then by the end of the week, what they've done is they've gotten all of the nutrition they need, even though, they were allowed to just pick whatever they wanted. And so it kind of, that type of information makes me think, well, our bodies clearly understand what they need. It's more of us, getting out of our own way and listening to that information. Now, here's the tricky part, of course, is because we have so much gut dysbiosis, where you've got candida overgrowth or other organisms that are out of balance. Sometimes your gut bacteria will tell you, eat a bunch of sugar because that's what I like, but that's actually having a negative effect on your health and your body. So the caveat to all of that is, of course, you have to also educate yourself, understand, where your body is at, so then you can help support it in the best way possible.
Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask you as well, because a lot of women were put on the pill at a young age for acne. So obviously we know now that there's a connection between acne and gut health. But one of the things is that, women will come off the birth control pill, or even be scared to come off of it in general, because they're worried that the acne will come back. And so they finally go off of it, and then all of a sudden, their acne has come back. And that's one of the things that can drive women to go back on it. Because, of course, when you're in your mid 30s, the last thing you need to do is be going to work like a teenager with acne on your face because, like, come on, did I go through this already? So,
Yeah.
how can
Well,
kombucha play a role in that?
absolutely. And then you're hitting the nail on the head. It's because it helps bring the gut into balance. Think about this. The acne is a sign that there's some toxins in your body that need to be expressed. And it's likely coming from dietary influences or potentially external sources, be that, again, the water, chemicals, any, stuff you're putting on your skin to help prevent the acne, and it comes from a lack of understanding that that's really where it's coming from. So when you go to the root cause rather than just address the symptom, that's when the real healing occurs. And you end up bringing your body back into balance so that it doesn't have to express all those toxins through your skin. I mean, we need to start to recognize that all of these ailments are actually signals to us that something's not right in the system and we need to find a way to rebalance.
Yeah.
And so kombucha does that. I mean, a lot of people say their skin clears up, and then you can also use it topically. So we have kombucha soap that we use, but in the book we also have recipes for facials that you can make either with the SCOBY or with kombucha. You can also do hair tonic. So if you want to start to remove some of the chemicals from your healthcare and beauty routine, we have some great recipes in there to help you do that. And what that means then too is that kombucha is we call it a closed loop system. Like every piece of what you're creating can be repurposed or used in another way. So we can even eat the SCOBY. I don't know if you know that, Lisa, but we've got some recipes in our book for SCOBY fruit leather, for making SCOBY sashimi, and all
I think
kinds of
I
great
saw that. I
things.
think I'm gonna. It took first of all, the first time I saw the SCOBY, I was kind of, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm pretty. I don't know. I'm pretty adventurous. I mean, I did touch it, but I remember the first time I have to, to take it out, put in. But the very first time I kind of was hesitant to touch it. To be
Hmm.
honest, I was like, and then my husband was just rolling his eyes. And I'm like, okay, no. He's like, you brought this thing in here. You got it. You got to touch it.
Well, I think they feel soft and
Yeah,
smooth.
they
They're really
do.
like dense and firm. And some people say they kind of look like a placenta.
I
So
guess so.
I've
Yeah.
heard them called all kinds of things, and that's definitely one of them.
But I mean, but it's really like, again, like once you do it, because I mean, I'm not a seasoned kombucha brewer like you. The kombucha specifically was very recent, so I have brewed, I think, 3 batches, three or
There you
four
go. Well,
batches,
hey,
something like that.
look, it's like we call it the kombucha. You get your rhythm. Like you didn't necessarily know how to do the hokey pokey the first time you did
No,
it,
I
but
didn't.
now all of a sudden you can turn yourself around and you got no problem with that. So
Yeah.
it's the same thing with all of these ferments is learning their rhythm, learning the pattern of the process, and then it kind of again becomes this instinctual way. But it's definitely daunting at first, especially because we're unfamiliar with that. But like you said, if you think about it as kind of like a loving pet, if you care for it, it will care for you. And that again is part of the symbiosis. I mean, think about this. We're working with a culture that has figured out how multiple organisms can work together in harmony. And that's essentially what our body is. Our body is a supraorganism. It's not just one thing, it's many things that have to work together in this incredibly complex way in order to be successful. And so, if we can create peace within our singular organism by bringing it back into balance, by understanding, what nutrition we need to make that healthy, now think about what we can do for our communities. So many people who experience kombucha, they write in, they leave testimonials. They say, this stuff really helped me. I was able to regain mobility. I was able to kind of get my life back. And that energy, that excitement of feeling good just starts to spread out to other people. They share it with other family members who are skeptical at first, but now because of your positive results are like, hey, let me give that a try. And, if we can kind of spread this type of good feeling, that I think is really, look, we're here to help each other, I think. And if we're too busy focused on our health because we feel terrible and things like that, it's really hard then to be connected to our communities and give back. But if we start to feel good again, who knows where people are going to take that positive energy.
Well, and it's such an important point that you make in terms of like the fact that we're just not that comfortable with the idea of fermentation because of what we've been taught about bacteria. So if you think about like if you think about a Lysol commercial or something, and they
Mm.
have these like angry looking green guys that are just, they have menacing face. Like it's so silly, right? But that's basically what has trained us to think that all germs are bad. So we have this germophobia situation happening. But just like you said, that it's this symbiotic culture of microbes on your counter growing, it really occurs to me. So I think that there's something to be said. So even though I was a little squeamish, that was the very first time I looked at it. The very first time I had to like, take it out. But again, it's like anything else. You just get used to it. It becomes normal, and it becomes actually really interesting and really exciting, because it's one thing to like talk about it and to talk about kombucha and how it's fizzy, and it's another thing to put black tea into a container, put a SCOBY on top, leave it for a week, come back and have a totally different beverage, and to be super fascinated about how that happened. And also, I'm a bit of a nerd, and so this is how I look at things. So you can tell me if this thought has ever crossed your mind. But so when you ferment anything, not just kombucha, it's sitting on the counter fermenting at room temperature. Your body exists. Obviously, your body temperature is higher than room temperature, but your body exists not in a refrigerator. It exists in room temperature. If you put a banana peel on the table, it rots and all kinds of nasty fuzz grows on it. But if you ferment stuff, it preserves it. And so for me, the act of actually making these things has really changed the way I look at food and the way I look at my body, because I really think when I look at this stuff and I see that it doesn't go bad, and I see that it can sit on the counter and it can,
Yeah.
it really occurs to me that when I'm eating these things, they're not rotting in me, right? They're
Right. Well, and here, you're hitting something on the head without saying it, and that's bacterial force field. Like this concept of good bacteria, bad bacteria comes out of the germ theory, that Louis Pasteur and all those folks kind of purported in the 1860s. I mean, we're still hanging on to a theory from the 1860s. It's the 21st century already. Come on now. Can't we evolve beyond just a singular, simplified, dumbed down concept of good and bad? The truth is that, we need candida in our bodies to a certain amount. We need H. pylori in our bodies in a certain amount. It's really about the balance of these things. That causes the issues. And so it's getting away from this idea of good bacteria and bad bacteria, but the environment that they're in. And also this concept of isopathy, which is like controls like. And we can extend this not just from the bacterial world, but all the way into the human world. And when, humans get together and say, hey, we're not going to tolerate a certain type of behavior from other humans, that is, again, like controlling like. It's saying we're not going to take that. And this is what we do when we populate our bodies with, these good bacteria, is they're killing bad bacteria. They're holding them in check. They're keeping their colonies into a smaller space where they're going to be able to serve the functions that they need to do, but also not be so out of balance that we have negative effects from them. And so when we think about consuming our fermented foods as really consuming our immune system, consuming our bacteria force field, and, call me crazy, but I really think that the way that bacteria communicate through quorum sensing, which is they just send out signals and they'll know how to behave as a result of that, I think that's part of our gut reaction. So when we meet someone and we have this instinctual like, oh, I like that person, or we meet someone and we think, oh, that was off or wrong, I really feel like part of that is our bacterial defense mechanism, giving us signals that something's not right. When you look at the enteric system, which goes from mouth to anus and everything that's in there, it has far more neurotransmitters than our brain. And it's made out of the same tissue. Now, it's all connected through the vagus nerve, which, goes from the brainstem all the way through the body. But this is how we're able to kind of have those instantaneous reactions that are really life-saving. And in our minds, we might go back and justify, oh, well, they said this or they had that behavior. But really, on that gut level, we're getting information that's incredibly vital, and we need to listen to that information.
That's pretty deep, Hannah. I think you just blew some minds with that, because I've never thought about it that way.
This is all stuff I learned from drinking kombucha, and it's not, again, because of the kombucha, but it's just, things just start to make sense when you're able to clear the mind of the garbage that's out there and clear the mind of, what you've been told your whole life, and you start to feel into what it means to be a human being.
Yes. Well, I have a few final questions to wrap up the show. Wow. Thank you for that. And before I get into the final questions, I just want to ask one other question, just to kind of speak to, if a mom has a healthy gut, the impact that that can have on her baby.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is what we're really starting to understand, right, Lisa, is that, as the child comes through the birth canal, that's where they're receiving their first inoculation of immune system. And, to the point where, nowadays there's a consciousness that if you have to do a C-section for a certain reason, they're starting to swab the mother's vaginal canal and then wipe the baby in that in order to help them get the bacteria they need to digest the breast milk and things like that. So, we've also lost something by over medicalizing birth because of, the amount of antibiotics women will take, or because of the C-sections and things like that. And more just out of a lack of understanding, not because of any ill intent per se. But as we kind of understand that consciousness, it's really exciting to think about how we can, you know, even though we may not be passing on the same amazing immune system or bacteria diversity that maybe our ancestors had, we can start with consciousness to bolster that so that future generations will end up with healthier immune systems than maybe our generation has been able to experience. And so the knowledge is really important, that we understand that complex relationship, because it's really what's going to allow us to create strong, healthy people.
Okay, and three final questions for the day. So, the first one, for someone who has never fermented anything before, is freaked out by the idea, or isn't, and is just like, wow, I didn't know about this crazy world of fermentation. What would you want them to know about fermented foods?
They're incredibly safe. The low pH of kombucha is kills harmful organisms on contact. So it's something that's incredibly safe. Also, it's like a food. So just as foods will get moldy to tell you that they're inedible, the same is true with these ferments. So if you notice mold, then you should just get rid of all of that and start over with to make a fresh batch. But that is really, so many people are afraid, well, is there something in there that I can't see that's going to hurt me? The answer is no. There's nothing in there that you can't see that will hurt you. It's only going to be very visible and obvious if there's something wrong.
Yeah, and they're really easier than you think. I know. I remember the first time I made kombucha, I had my recipe out, and I'm like in the kitchen, and trying to do everything right. And then by the second or third time, it really occurred to me, I'm like, I'm just making tea and putting sugar in it. Like,
Exactly right. Exactly. It really is that simple. And it's that simplicity that sometimes freaks people out because they're expecting it to be really hard and difficult, but it is simple.
okay. And for what would you say is the most important thing that a woman should know when she's trying to get pregnant?
Just really to honor and listen to your body, and that you might need certain foods or certain things that you didn't realize you needed, and to be open to that, because I think we have a lot of dogma around food and rules, and if you're following a certain dietary, you can never break from that. And I would say honor the body's wisdom, go back to the things that make sense. Sometimes people who have been vegetarian for a long time find that eating meat actually allows their bodies to reproduce. But again, that's not for everybody. So you have to listen to your body, but also don't be so strictly held by the rules you've created for yourself. Really allow that innate wisdom to come through.
Love that. And final question of the day. For a woman who is listening and maybe she's currently on the pill, she doesn't want to get pregnant right now, but she is thinking about getting pregnant in the next 2 to 3 years. What, if any, advice would you give to her?
Go off the pill. I mean, like I said, your body will reproduce when the conditions are right. And there are so many tools out there to help you avoid pregnancy by understanding your body and its signals. And, I think there's a whole body of female wisdom that's been kind of lost in terms of, there are ways in which we can support our bodies either to get pregnant or to not get pregnant. And so seeking out that type of wisdom and trusting that it's not like as soon as you get rid of the birth control, you're just going to get pregnant. It's trusting that letting go of those hormones that you don't really need is just going to clean out your system.
That's a perfect note to end on. Hannah, thank you so much for being here today. I would love for you to take a minute and tell the listeners about your new book that's coming out perfectly timed, well, sort of perfectly timed, within 10 days of perfect timing of when your book is being released.
It's the Big Book of Kombucha. Myself and my partner, we've been brewing and cultivating it for over a decade. It's all of our wisdom distilled into 400 pages. So we have almost 300 flavoring inspirations. We have 100 more other recipes, cocktail food and whatnot. But of course, we also have all of the nitty-gritty how-to, and again, those tips we've learned from many years of brewing. And what's really different about this book is it also has a robust symptom-specific section that's all tied to research that's been done on kombucha. So we were very conscientious to make sure everything we were talking about was supported through research. Through science. So it's a great book. It's like a fun textbook. And so anyone who's loves kombucha or is new to it or just wants to get into something different, it's beautiful and learn more about fermented foods. It's really going to be a terrific gift for yourself or for others. And then if you want to learn about kombucha and how to make it, and you want to do that right away without grabbing the book yet, go to kombuchacamp.com/kombucha recipe, and we have a free DIY book you can sign up for. You get the recipe and all of that good stuff. So you can also grab the book at our store as well, and it'll be included in all of our kits as well. So take a look at that stuff.
Yes, no, definitely for the listeners, if this conversation intrigued you about fermenting kombucha or anything else, I would say just ferment something, or let's bring some sort of probiotics into your life. But kombuchacamp.com is an amazing resource. So I've been on there with my recent kombucha experiment, and basically I felt like it answered pretty much all the questions that I had. So if you're on the go, just head over to fertilityfriday.com/69, and the link to the website will be on there, or just Google kombucha camp. So couldn't recommend it more highly. So thanks again.
And I forgot to mention, Lisa, that we also have kefir on there too. So if you're into milk kefir, water kefir, or jun, which is a green tea raw honey ferment for those avoiding sugar, we've got information on all of those there. So
yes, we didn't talk a lot about kefir today, but kefir is another amazing ferment with obviously not zillions, but kind of zillions of beneficial microbes.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I really enjoyed talking to you today, and looking forward to connecting again.
Yes, for sure. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so head over to the show notes page and let me know what you found most helpful, what you found most intriguing, and you'll find the show notes for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/69, so the number 69. What I hope that you took from this episode is that we can all benefit from introducing beneficial microbes into our bodies to improve our immune system, to improve our fertility. So hopefully if you decide to make some kombucha, or if you decide to make some kefir, or if you just decide to go to the store and buy some, you let me know how that goes, and if it helped you in any way. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S, on Twitter at fertilefriday. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, join the community. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/community and you'll be redirected to the Fertility Friday Fertility Awareness Facebook group. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, please look for it on iTunes and leave a 5-star review so that more people can find the show. And of course, leave an honest review. Let me know what you think and let me know how I'm doing. I do read all of the reviews and I really appreciate you letting me know how I'm doing. And also, if you have a podcast suggestion, if you have an idea for a podcast episode or a guest suggestion, you can send me an email at info@fertilityfriday.com. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast. Thank you for letting me be a part of your day and hanging out with me for a while. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.